We're doing a timing belt water pump on a 13 Kia Soul. It's got a 2.0. Okay, we're gonna get back here and replace this belt, and the water pump's underneath it. So the first thing I do is jack up the car. Back stands as always. I'm gonna take that shield off. It's got 4 little 10s in it, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. It sits right here. I didn't bring my air compressor or my impact. I'm just gonna get a job. I just kind of got. So when I don't have that, I kind of set this up. This is a 22. I'll take my breaker bar and I'll put it where it's like wedged on. This particular house, it just happens to be here, but this not here. It just sits on the ground. If I don't have to ground or soft, I put it against a wall like here. So we got that all set up. It's hard. Then we'll grab a key. We go inside, and then we go one little click. We'll come back here. There it is. So if you're ever stuck somewhere, you don't have impact. Now this doesn't work for Hondas, it doesn't work for every car. The rotation of the engine has to be clockwise. So when you put this up, this kind of holds the engine in place, and you're using a starter to loosen this bolt up. Okay, once we get that going, we'll go to the next step. So now we got the crank bolt loose. You're gonna take your jack with a piece of wood and you're gonna put it right underneath the oil pan. You're gonna jack it up just a little bit till you start seeing it go up. Then you're gonna come back on this side. We're gonna release this power steering. It just pops out of here, and those 2 little nipples just pop it up, pull it up, and then we're gonna need, I use a 1/2 inch on these ones. They're a little harder. We got 17 and 14. And here's the 17 for the motor mount. So here's 17 nut, 17 nut, 17 nut, and a 17 bolt. These 2, you kind of see the end of them are different than this nut, so keep them separate. And then that front panel has another 14 nut right there. That's a 14 millimeter. So I just loosened that one too, so I could remove this front cover. And then the next step we're going to do is we're going to remove the power steering and the alternator belts, brackets, AC belts. We're going to take the belts off, and I think pretty sure one of those brackets has to come out of the way. I think I got to remove the power steering to get to the alternator bracket, but I'll check that once I get there. So long extension, breaker bar makes it easy. 17, pull this out to the side. And here's my 14 millimeter. All right, so next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take this, those 4 bolts off the front of this pulley. This is the water pump pulley. And before you wanna take this belt off, I use the belt as kind of like leverage to hold this down. So now that the motor mount is removed from the top, I've jacked the engine down so I could remove the crank pulley, and that gives me some space enough to get to this bolt. So what I like to get 2 at a time. So the other, then we'll rotate this till we get to the other 2 down to the bottom. pushing against the belt, and the belt kind of gives it tension and holds it there. But okay, now that they're loose, and this thing, because I just tied it kind of by hand, now you gotta tap and loosen it so it loosens up again. Okay, so now those 4 bolts are loose. And then on top, we'll take a 14 and get behind the power steering here, and then the other bolt is underneath. Kind of like right there. Loosen these up. So this one goes back and forth. I'm gonna take these bolts off so I can move this power steering pump. I'll be right back. Okay, so now we got the power steering pump out of the way. Let's pick it up and move it out of here, and that's why you want to kind of remove this. This needs to be loose. This needs to be loose. This thing has an electric connector to it. Connects right here. It's got a 1 push tab. Gotta push the spools up. You gotta release the little clip that holds it into place. It goes right here. So you squeeze it out of the back. So now you have room to get your alternator. So next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna release the bolt of the alternator back here. And then we'll take the alternator belt off by the tension on it is right here. Just gonna release that back bolt, the bolt on the bottom, and then by releasing this tensioner bolt, you eventually release the belt, and then we'll take the belt off. Again, because I'm pretty sure I have to take this bracket off to get to the water pump, I'm gonna remove the alternator. And if I remove the alternator, I'm gonna disconnect the battery really quick. So we'll disconnect the negative, remove the alternator, remove that bracket, and then we'll take off that AC belt in the back. Okay. All right, so we took the power steering pump out of the way. We got to the alternator. We took both of the alternator bolts out. Choose this one that gives it tension. It goes in the back. And this one that goes underneath. Remember how these washers go? Like, this goes in here. You could leave this one on if you want. I like to just pop it out and pull it out of the way. Keep your belts where they're supposed to be. So here's the alternator, and then when you go to put this back on, take a little hammer and tap that back in. Put a little WD-40 in there and tap that back in so this goes on easy. And then keep the belts with them. So this is the alternator belt, this is the power steering belt. Now this is my water pump pulley. These were the 4 little nuts that we loosened up earlier. Once I got the alternator out of the way, it was easy to get these bolts. So took them off one by one. They were loose. And then both these pulleys come off, and then this is the power steering belt. And then we're gonna go ahead and remove this bracket because it's in front of the water pump. And then we'll remove the AC belt on that side, and then the crank, and then we'll remove this front cover and get to the belt and the pump. All right, we'll be back. Okay, so we got the alternator out of the way. We got the water pump pulleys out of the way. Then we came down here, and the first thing I did was I rotated the crank where I got my 0 to line up close to here. And then you're gonna loosen up a 14 for the AC belt, and this the tension underneath here. You're gonna loosen this up, and this will slide up and down. And then we'll take the AC belt off, and then the center bolt. It's a crank bolt, you'll take that off. You see a little bit of rust on it. That makes it a little hard to come off, but bring that off. And the crank, you wanna put both your hands around it and put your thumb kind of in the center of this point, and kind of, the crank comes out very smooth when it's just even and out. If you go side to side, it kind of gets stuck. So take the crank off, and then right behind the crank there's a little metal washer. That's the washer I'm talking about. And the crank comes off. I gotta go get an AC belt. Look at this AC belt, it's great. So now that we have this, then we'll take off these front face bolts all around to expose the timing belt. And we'll be back. Okay, so we got both top cover. The top cover is easy. The bottom cover you kind of maneuver around, and you kind of have to jack the car back up a little bit to give yourself some space in the front to get that cover off. So now that the belt is exposed, and the tensioner, we're actually 180 off. So this hole right there needs to line up with that red mark right there. So we'll put the bolt back on the crank. We'll take our 22, 180 on the tap. The mark is in the back. Underneath it, we can put a little pin in here. You are clicking that little center. So now that we know we're on top dead center, we're going to release this 12. This will release the tensioner on the belt. We'll take the tensioner off. We'll take the idler off down there. We'll take the belt off. I'm not doing any seals to this, so once we take that stuff off, we'll take the water pump off and then go backwards. So I'm just going to get into the 12 and release that, take the belt out of the way, and then keep taking this bolt off. And down the bottom, which is the tensioner right there. That looks like a 12 or 14. We'll take that one off. All right, I'll be back. I mark my belt. I do not like getting the teeth off. I didn't like thinking about it, so I put an X on top, and I put 2 marks on my cam, and then 2 marks on my crank. And then when I take the belt off, I just match a new belt to these new marks and put it back exactly where I took it off. So belt off. Plus 2 bolts on top. And now we're gonna take this tensioner off, and then the water pump's underneath it. We got 1, 2, I think bolts underneath this water pump. Maybe just 2 more. We'll take that off, drain the antifreeze, take the water. Okay, so we got to the point where we took the water pump off. We'll clean that surface, make sure all the residue, everything's out of there. And here's the kit we have. It's a new timing belt. I'm gonna match the marks on my old time belt to a new one. The water pump is a gasket, is a paper gasket, aftermarket. The original stuff. Oh, a little no into it. That's the part. So we're gonna put this back on. Put the 3 bolts on that we can on the water pump. We'll put that idler back on, and then we'll put the belt on, put the tensioner on, tighten up, and then we'll come back. Okay, so we've got the idler in there, and I've marked my belt. This is a good way to make sure I didn't accidentally put the wrong belt on, so I just put a little X on top, and I start with this right one, and I kind of make my mark, and I follow the belt with my fingers all the way around, and then I make that mark, then I make this mark, and then come back up, and I make this last mark. So this and this kind of line up. All right, so you know your teeth are exact, you know the space is exact, you got the right belt, and now when you put this belt on, if you put on the same exact place, took the old one off, the timing should not have to be moved. You know, this car is easy, some cars are a little trickier, so it just depends what you do with it. This tensioner has a little pin out of it that you can use to keep it in place. It's easier to install. So we're gonna go ahead and put the belt back on and put the tensioner back on. And then after that is reverse process. After that is easy. There's not much more. All the foot-pounds would be in that instructions. If not, you find them online. But tighten everything properly, and then stick that little sticker on. All right. So this how the setup is. I got my timing marks on. That's the top. Both sides are on. I use this clip to keep it in place. The bottom, they're in place. On this side, a idler. Now it's time to throw a tensioner on. All right. Okay. So now that we have this tensioner in, this tensioner, those two teeth need to get in. Almost has like two little freeze plugs in the front. We'll get in that bottom. We'll get in that bottom lower one, and it's sitting flat. So you want to hand tighten this all tight, and then this is gonna go this way. I'm gonna use a 7mm Allen to push this way until I get that piece in the window, and then we'll tighten it up, and I'll show you the timing marks. Okay, so you got your tensioner on. You're gonna use a 6mm Allen right there, and I use a mirror. I'm gonna put it right here. Look back in the mirror. You're trying to, that arrow right there, you're trying to get in that window. Right, so when you move the Allen, that silver part moves back and forth, and you get it to a point where it's in the window, and then you tighten it with the 12. And this was pretty tight when I took it off, so I made sure it was pretty tight when I put it back on. And basically what we mean by the window, it has it on here. So this is the rotation. So you want to kind of tighten the center part and then put tension, a little bit of tension. It's not even tension, you just got to get this to where it lines up. And this ends up being kind of down on mine a little bit to the right, but this is what you're looking for. That's the window, and that's what we're looking for to be under. So it's on, it's tight. Our belt is tight on this side, it's tight on that side. So now that everything's on, I just manually go through a whole rotation. I go through 2 cycles from the bottom, 1 on top, and I make sure that my top dead center is back lined up to where it's supposed to be. Come right to the bottom and top. So we'll go ahead and put a little mark up here to see where it's supposed to be. So we'll rotate it and make sure it ends up back in the same place. Okay, so I've got a timing cover on. Put that washer that's between this on. And since I didn't bring my, sorry about these dogs next door. I didn't bring my compressor. The way I time these, I just kind of put this back on, is hand tight, and then I get a hammer and just tap it hard. And I know it rotates, but you'll just keep tapping it. This thing tightens on its own kind of. I mean, the way it rotates, that bolt does not come off, but you still want it to sit. So I kind of hold one hand over and just